Well, hello there. Let's make some Minecraft Resin Paperweights, or Nerdy Decor if that's your thing. Come on, it'll be fun! So you might be wondering, Pam, why the slime and snow golem? Well, I had a bunch of these silicone cube molds I purchased, and I figured I should use them for something. And to be honest, the slime and snow golem were two characters my little pea brain figured I could make. Yep, you guessed it. I chose the easy path. Or so I thought. To begin, I printed off a couple of reference photos, then opened up the fancy deep pour resin I bought from Magic Resin, and was happily surprised to see they sent me some free pigments as part of a promotion. Thanks, Magic Resin! I prepped my workspace so I wouldn't make a mess all over my kitchen counter and got to mixing up some resin. Because I was making two characters and I needed one of the cubes for both projects, I had to work in stages. I first decided to pour the inside of the slime, that inner cube with the little cute yet beady eyes. And at the same time, I would pour the snow golem's head and torso. I needed the second largest cube that I was using for the slime for the golem's booty. I used the white and lime green pigments from Magic Resin. Magic Resin also gives you this adorable little spade to scoop out your pigment with. This resin is mixed with a 2-to-1 ratio, 2 parts of A, the resin, to 1 part of B, the hardener. I did end up measuring part A and B in 2 separate containers for the first pour, and later learned you should measure in the same container. I believe this is to ensure all of the resin and hardener you need is included, so you don't leave any behind when you pour them together. But I'm not an expert. Anywho, I mixed the resin and added a guesstimated amount of the pigment using my "yep, that looks good" method. To completely combine this resin, it needs to be stirred for 4 to 5 minutes. Make sure you scrape the sides and bottom of the container as you stir. When I felt like my arm was about to fall off, I knew it was time to pour the resin. I poured the green resin into my mold and poured the excess into another mold. I used the heat gun to attempt to pop as many of the bubbles as I could. Then I repeated the same steps for the golem part, this time measuring and mixing the resin and hardener in one container, and adding the white pigment. I poured the white resin into 3 molds, even though I would only be using 2 of them. Waste not, want not, as the saying goes. I'll save the other piece for a future project. And then use the heat gun to pop some of the bubbles. And now we wait. This resin has a curing time of 2 to 3 days. From what I'm learning, the deep pour resins take longer to cure. It's demolding time! Let me tell you, while the silicone does come off the resin easily, it was a pain in my behind to remove these cubes from their molds. And at one point the silicone snapped back and I cut my thumb on the sharp edge of the resin. Jinkies! I ended up rolling the molds down and off the resin to remove them, and then just popping the molds back into shape afterwards. As a side note, the Magic Resin pigments have a bit of a sparkle in them, which wasn't exactly the look I was going for, but they still worked. And now it's time for more resin pours! I mixed up some more resin with the white pigment and poured it into one of the larger molds for the golem's booty, and poured the excess into a gem mold. I'm learning it's a good idea to have extra molds lying around for the excess resin. Hopefully I'll be able to use these extra resin pieces sometime in the future. Again, use the heat gun to pop any bubbles and set them aside to cure. Time to make a mess. The next part is attempt number 1, making the pumpkin helmet for the snow golem, and it was a complete and utter messy failure. My goal was to use 2 of the molds to make a resin box that could be put on and taken off the snow golem's head. I used small stones to weigh down the inner mold so it wouldn't get pushed up as the resin cured. And I may have used a bit too many stones and it sank into the resin. No! Had I let it cure like this, I would have lost my mold inside a bunch of resin. So I pulled the whole thing apart and then had to wait until the failed mess cured before maybe attempting again or trying another option. Also, I didn't like the orange pigment I chose, so maybe it's for the best. It's polymer clay time! I have to admit, I procrastinated doing this part of the project. I am new to polymer clay and honestly thought I was going to bleep it up. Turns out this part was relatively simple and relaxing. So here's a little time lapse of me making tiny squares out of polymer clay to be used as the eyes, mouth, and charcoaled buttons. I also attempted to make the snow golem arms, but we aren't going to talk about that. Guess what? It's resin time again! While the clay was baking, I mixed up some resin for the bottom layer of the slime cube. I needed this layer in place and cured in the mold before setting the smaller green cube inside. This layer would ensure the smaller cube stayed in the center of the bigger mold without sinking to the bottom. At this point, I also decided to torture myself again by attempting to make the pumpkin helmet one final time. This was a balancing act. I started by picking a more suitable orange color, poured resin in the bottom, and then around the sides of the smaller mold so I didn't end up overflowing the smaller mold again. I had one of my junior Pamerkists grab me some more small stones, and then very carefully drop them into the mold while it was immersed into the resin while still floating. I also used one of the stir sticks to help keep the smaller mold in the center. It was mostly successful. I breathed a sigh of relief when the mold stayed in place and then issued a do not touch order to the family. After a couple of days, I was able to pull off the silicone molds. There were some rough spots on the bottom of the helmet, which I may have quickly smoothed out with the belt sander. There also was a bit of unevenness in the thickness of the sides of the helmet, but I was so happy it even worked that I didn't really care. It's gluing time! Welcome to my little gluing montage, where I use 2-part epoxy to painstakingly attach all those tiny little clay parts to the resin. Oh, and the snow golem's body parts together. Here you will also see me try to futilely glue the horrible little clay arms to the snow golem. They look like he had an accident with a blowtorch. Here's to our little shop of horror golems. I'm so glad I scrapped that idea. Also, very sorry about the lighting, my window light was malfunctioning. The final pour! Hold your breath, folks. We're about to finish the Minecraft slime. I mixed up some more resin, added the green food coloring. I used food coloring instead of the resin pigment because I needed a lighter, more transparent shade for the outside of the slime. I set the smaller cube in. Boop! Isn't he cute? And poured the resin around him. Then used the heat gun to pop the bubbles again. And then we wait. A few days later. A week to be exact, because I was on vacation. I demolded the slime and may have struggled a tiny little bit. If anyone has any tips to get resin out of tight molds, let me know down below. Sadly, there was a bubble on the bottom, but overall, he's still pretty cute. What? Sanding? Yep, there were some sharp edges, so I wet sanded them down to prevent little hands or big hands from hurting themselves. The last steps. Let's finish this puppy up. I used a fine tip Sharpie to draw on the golem's face for the pumpkin helmet. Then I made him some better arms using a skewer. I drew on dark brown stripes with a Sharpie, painted over them with a lighter shade of brown to better match the golem's arms in my reference photo, and then after sawing and sanding the ends to an angle, I glued them onto the snow golem with hot glue. And dare I say, he's freaking adorable. Go me! And there you have it, an adorable Minecraft snow golem with removable pumpkin helmet and a cute slime to use as paperweights or nerdy shelf decor if that's your thing. Clearly it's mine. Thanks so much for watching. I hope I've inspired you to get creative today. Hit that subscribe and like button if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more of me. My name is Pam and this is Total Pamerky, the craft channel with a little anarchy. Until next time, boop!